April 13th, 1988, number 4 Privet Drive. It had started with a puzzle box that Uncle Vernon had brought home for Dudley. The plump boy's primary school teacher felt that Dudley needed to work on his problem-solving skills and had suggested puzzles or models, something to occupy both Dudley's hands and his mind. Vernon had not characteristically dismissed the recommendation and had gone out to find something for his precious dudders to play with, which would also provide something of a challenge. He had returned with an intricately wrought Chinese puzzle box. After Dudley had spent 5 minutes trying to open the box, he discarded it in disgust in favor of his cartoons. Harry picked it up and solved it in less time than it took Dudley to throw it away. With each correct move, a simple but enchanting melody began to play. Aunt Petunia had come to investigate the melody as Harry completed the puzzle.
"How dare you?"
Petunia had snarled, snatching the box and grabbing Harry.
"Haven't we told you not to play with any of Dudley's things?"
But, without letting him finish, Aunt Petunia had opened the cupboard and thrown Harry inside, locking him in. That had probably saved the young boy's life. The lights faded and a bell began to toll. The Dursleys had stopped talking, confused by the darkness and bell tolling so closely, but neither their silence nor their confusion lasted. First the shouting began, quickly followed by the screaming. It lasted a lifetime, a blood-curdling symphony of terror and pain given voice. Then all fell to silence, save for the soft tune, the bell, and a young boy's terrified breathing. The house was filled with flickering shadow. The lights were out in every room. In the living room, the television provided a small amount of illumination as it crackled with blue-white static. A strange, unearthly light played across the floors, walls, ceilings. Feet on the stairs. His intense curiosity balancing his fear, Harry peeked out of a crack in the door. A pale, black-clad figure stepped into view. Harry stopped breathing. The figure, a tall, imposing man, seemed to blend into the shadow, making his pale head seem to float through the air as he walked down the hallway leading to the kitchen. He nearly passed the covered door when he stopped. Harry's heart joined his lungs in inactivity. The regal figure tilted his head a fraction to the side, as if sensing something, before he continued into the kitchen. Harry's heart resumed beating, and he took a shallow breath of relief. Licking his lips nervously, Harry leaned against the cupboard wall, trying to see what was happening outside. The dark man entered the kitchen and went to the table. He reached out to pick up the puzzle box. Suddenly, a pair of black, bottomless eyes stared back at Harry from less than a foot away. Before he could stifle it, Harry let out a scream of unadulterated terror. He fell to the cupboard floor with a loud thump and scurried back as far as he could. A deep voice intoned,
"Almost over."
He heard the latch click and froze as the cupboard door swung open. A dark figure stood in the doorway, imposing and terrifying despite its slight frame. Harry realized with horror that it was a woman. Slowly, gracefully, she crouched down and leaned into the cupboard.
"We hear everything. We see everything,"
she said in a brittle voice. Harry barely registered her words. His eyes locked at the base of her throat. It had been peeled open, and he knew that if he looked closely enough, he would be able to see her spine. Filled with more terror than he thought possible, and unable to move anything, Harry flicked his eyes upward, meeting her cool gaze.
"Hiding in the cupboard won't save you, child,"
she said with a shake of her head, somehow speaking, even though Harry could see that her voice box had been removed. Her throat was just an empty cavity. She began to reach in, intending to grab hold of Harry and pull him out, when a slender but strong arm intervened.
"No."
The woman looked up. It was the man who had been in the kitchen.
"No?"
asked the woman, clearly confused by the man's actions.
"No,"
repeated the man, giving a slight shake of his head.
"Why?"
asked another voice from a large figure that Harry could only vaguely discern on the woman's other side.
"You know what happens to those who stand in hell's way,"
intoned the man, his voice deep and regal.
"The same can be said of those who stand in the way of fate and destiny."
Placing a hand on her shoulder, the man urged the woman back to her feet and out of the cupboard entrance. He moved to kneel down, just as the woman had done. Harry stared at him, even more terrified than he had been when faced with the woman's mutilated visage. The man's face was ghostly pale. Deep, bloodless cuts slashed up, down, and across his head, spaced about an inch apart. inch-long needles were driven into his head at each intersection. His eyes were even darker than the woman's, seemingly endless in their depth, their promise of pain unimaginable. With surprising gentleness, Pinhead reached out and brushed his fingers over Harry's forehead, flicking his messy fringe aside and revealing the lightning-shaped scar hidden there.
A scar?
Asked the woman.
A sign.
Elaborated Pinhead.
That this one is marked by fate.
Dropping his hand from where it rested, so cold that it burned like ice against Harry's skin, Pinhead reached behind him. With the same delicate care he had used to reveal Harry's scar, he brought out the puzzle box, which had continued to play its simple tune the entire while.
This, child,
said Pinhead, holding the box up for Harry to clearly see,
is the lament configuration. It is a means to summon us.
Pinhead looked up from the box and leveled a stare at Harry, who remained frozen in place, scarcely daring to breathe.
Remember it,
Pinhead commanded. Harry barely managed a weak nod as Pinhead returned his attention to the puzzle box, the lament configuration. He watched with fascination as the leader of the demons that had taken the Dursleys began to return the box to its closed state. His fingers worked delicately over the intricate faces, sliding various parts back into place. With each maneuver, each section closed off, and the soft chimes of the tune grew quieter.
One day you will call for us again, Harry Potter,
predicted Pinhead, not bothering to look up as he continued to reset the puzzle box to its unopened condition. The last sounds of the musical tune began to fade away as the box grew closer and closer to closed. In the background, Harry was vaguely aware of the throatless female and her fat companion disappearing into the shadows, but his attention was focused almost entirely on the box in Pinhead's hands. With a grim finality, Pinhead slid the final panel into place. The bell gave one final, echoing toll as the demon set the puzzle box down on the floor, directly in front of Harry.
It is your destiny,
Pinhead whispered as he, too, vanished into the darkness that filled number 4. There was a click from the box as the panel settled firmly into place. The tune finally stopped. The last echoes of the bell died away, and there was a brief flickering of lights and the buzz of electricity surging through circuits once more. The lights came on with startling abruptness, just as the television blared to life, a sports commentary playing at full volume. Harry remained perfectly still for a brief moment, staring at the box laid before him. Finally, with trembling fingers, he picked it up from its place on the floor and stuffed it in the pocket of his oversized shirt. With trepidation as to what he might find, Harry stepped out of his cupboard and began to search the house for any sign of his relatives. Somehow he knew there would be no bodies, nothing but spilt blood. It was as if everything that had happened were no more than a dream or a nightmare.